You will do anything to fuel your addiction. I transacted sort of close to £2 million worth of bets online, probably double that when you think about what I was doing in casinos and betting shops. I ended up with the best part of £500,000 worth of gambling debt. Hi, I'm Patrick Foster. I'm a recovering gambling addict, and I'm here to answer questions from the Honesty Box. Who were you before you were addicted? I was somebody who was very successful, very high achieving, somebody who was very privileged, very fortunate in their background and education. And therefore, I guess I don't fit the typical stereotype of what an addict would look like or what a gambling addict necessarily would look like. It makes me realize that these issues really don't discriminate. There is no type, and it doesn't matter who you are. I had one dream in life, and that was to be a professional sportsman. I managed to achieve that dream for a little bit as a young professional cricketer before I became addicted to gambling. Were you immediately addicted from the first gamble? I would never say that I was immediately addicted, but I would say I was hooked. I can never actually explain the feeling that I got from the moment I placed that first bet and it won. The irony is I probably spent the next 13 years trying to replicate that feeling unsuccessfully. But I think the fact that my first bet pretty much was a winning bet had a huge impact on me, especially as somebody who's really competitive. Gambling, I believe, is like a drug for competitive people because it's all about winning and losing. And it gave me that on tap. So from a very early stage, I was totally and utterly hooked.
What was that first gamble?
I put £2 in a roulette machine. Pretty much the first time I'd ever been into a betting shop. I put £2 on green zero because it was the only number that was different from all the others. It was the last number to come up, and I sort of thought, well, what are the chances of it happening twice in a row? £2 became £72 in a matter of seconds, and as I always say, my life changed forever. At its worst, how often were you gambling and on what? At its worst, I was gambling literally the whole time. It sounds difficult for people to sort of believe or comprehend, but there weren't many points during a day where I wasn't gambling because I didn't have a bet on that was live or I was actually physically doing it. And I think that was one of the most difficult things when I was totally consumed and addicted, is that I could never get away from it because it was accessible 24 hours a day. I mean, there isn't much that I haven't gambled on, to tell the truth, and I would gamble on anything and anything that was available. I think what's really scary when you become totally addicted is I look back when I first started gambling and I would be able to put a bet on a horse race and I would watch that horse race and wait for the outcome. But by the end, a horse race was too long. I would have to be spinning a roulette wheel at the same time as watching a horse race and putting a bet on something else. And I think that's why so many of the products that are most addictive are the products that allow you to gamble with such high frequency and at such speed, because they service that kind of need to do it all the time. Do you have an addictive personality in general? Really interesting question, and something that I am a big believer in, because I believe that having an addictive personality is a very real thing. I have always had an incredibly addictive personality. I've always been very obsessive, always wanted to be the best at everything, very compulsive and impulsive. I want everything to happen immediately. I'm very competitive. All those things actually made me really high achieving in lots of ways. But I also understand that as a result, I'm more vulnerable when it comes to addictive substances and behaviors. But I don't think having an addictive personality should necessarily be considered a bad thing. It can be a real positive in lots of ways, but it needs to be managed and you have to have that awareness. Because if you don't, then as I found out the hard way, it can be completely the opposite. What was the defining moment you realised you were addicted. I realised pretty quickly with my relationship with gambling that it was unhealthy, but I guess I always thought I could just stop when I needed to, that I was kind of strong enough to deal with it. I guess the defining moment came in 2010 when I won and lost a life-changing sum of money. I won the best part of £35,000 one night. I then lost that in a matter of weeks. And from that moment onwards, my relationship changed completely. Because as soon as the money had gone, I wanted it back. I tried to win it back. I then started to lose even more, and reality set in. And it was at that point that gambling really started to completely consume me. Financially, emotionally, professionally, I was affected in every way you could imagine. How does gambling addiction differ from alcohol or drugs? There are certainly differences. There are obviously also big similarities. I think gambling obviously is a behavioural addiction rather than a substance addiction. But I think also there is still a misunderstanding when it comes to gambling addiction, because people still think when it comes to gambling, well, it's gambling, why don't you just stop? You're an idiot. When actually it is just like being addicted to drugs or alcohol, and dopamine is actually a very powerful drug. I always think it's really strange that I would have found it easier to admit that I had a problem with drugs or alcohol, because it's accepted, people can kind of understand it, whereas with gambling, people don't. And that's why it carries such a sort of stigma, and why it's such a taboo subject. I also think the other thing about gambling, which is the only thing that makes it completely different from other addictions, is weirdly the only thing you often think's going to solve it is the thing that's caused it in the first place. No alcoholic has ever tried to drink themselves sober. But as a gambling addict, you're often just focused on money, and you think it's all about money. You think all you need to do is win the money back and the problem goes away, as I found out. And actually, it's never, ever the solution. It's just going to make it worse. What's the biggest amount you won and lost? A football accumulator where I won the best part of £35,000. In terms of the biggest amount of money I lost was pretty much my final bet when everything came to a head in 2018, when I had £58,000 on one horse in one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. The horse came second by not too far, and my whole world came crashing down. But I always say to people, it's the best thing that actually ever happened to me, because it was probably the only thing that was ever going to make me stop. Is addiction a disease or a choice? There's a lot of sort of theories out there about addiction. Some people believe that it's to do with kind of nurture. Some people believe it's circumstance, environment, trauma. In my opinion, it's a combination of all those things. But I think what is clear to me is that addiction starts with a choice. Whether or not it is a disease or an illness can be debated. But in my opinion, I believe I had an illness. What's the worst thing you did to fuel your addiction? I mean, I think the thing about gambling is again, you need money to gamble. And sadly, there is always ways of getting money. I'm not proud to admit it, but I did things that I now can barely look myself in the eye. When I think about things like saying that I needed money for charitable causes, when actually, whilst my intention was probably to give it back, I would gamble it away and then think, well, what on earth do I do now? You will do anything to fuel your addiction. And often it's, you look back and you can't quite believe that you ever got to that point, but that is the power of addiction. Initially, when I was borrowing money, it was very much through sort of traditional mediums like banks, credit cards. Then it went to loans, then it went to payday loans, then it was loan sharks, gangsters, some cases drug dealers. And then once all that had run out, I started to borrow money off individuals, some of whom I was closely connected to, but often people that I wasn't because I was so fearful of getting found out. So I started to borrow money off parents of pupils that I taught because I knew people liked me, they respected me, they were worried about me, and lots of these people had that money. And I told them lies, as I say, that I can't believe I did and I'm not proud of, but they lent me the money and sadly I gambled it all away. At its best and worst, what did your addiction feel like? I mean, a lot of the time, it was sort of numbness, to tell the truth. I think what's really scary when actually you become addicted to gambling, in my opinion, it's less about the outcome and the kind of financial side of it. It's more about being in the bet and whether or not it's going to come in. The outcome is just whether or not you can have another bet or not. The feelings that come with it are so extraordinary because they're sort of so up and down often, but then towards the end, there just wasn't really much emotion attached. I think back to the kind of early days of my addiction, people found it really difficult to put their finger on what was kind of going on because sometimes I was so happy and on top of the world, and at other times I was so down and stressed. So that kind of irregular pattern of emotion is very different to what comes with other addictions or issues with mental health. Do you think betting should be illegal? In all honesty, no. I don't think prohibition is necessarily the solution to any problem. I'm not naive. I recognise that there are lots of people that gamble and don't have a problem with it, that aren't addicted to it. Just like there's lots of people that drink alcohol and aren't alcoholics. I think if we were to make gambling illegal, it would create way more problems that already exist. But what I do believe is that more should be done to protect people, particularly vulnerable people, and that there needs to be a bit more of a balance. And whilst there is a lot more done now than there perhaps used to be, I still think that more could, should, and must be done. How did you hide your addiction? I hid my addiction in every way you could possibly imagine. And for a long time, I was very, very good at hiding my addiction. I was very, very good at putting on a mask in certain situations. That's how I sort of got away with hiding it, is I would sort of make out that I was somebody that was very sort of happy-go-lucky, larger than life, when actually deep down I was completely the opposite. I hated myself, I hated the world, I hated who I'd become. But I just found this way of kind of masking the real me. I had anxiety to the point I could barely walk out my house every day, but nobody had a clue, and that's what's really scary. And of course there were times where people knew stuff was up and people recognized signs, but as soon as they did, I was very quick to dismiss them or push them away or shut them out of my life. That was probably what's most scary about my addiction.
Did anyone have any idea that you liked gambling so much, or that you were addicted?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it would be mad for me to sit here and say that for 13 years nobody had a clue that I gambled or that I had problems. I think the big difference was nobody really knew the extent of it or how much it was, and people didn't think that it was a problem. They thought I was doing it in the same way that other people were. There were times where my family obviously had huge concerns because I'd either break down emotionally, I'd behave in a way that would really worry them, but they could never really put their finger on what it was. And if gambling was ever brought up, I would just manage to sort of worm my way out of it. I think one of the differences in my experience of a gambling addiction is often people judge it, again, purely financially. And often I had money, it was just other people's money. So people thought, well, he can't have that bad a gambling problem if he's got money and he can afford to do X, Y, or Z. But the difference was it wasn't mine. How much money do you think you lost overall? I mean, it's really hard to put a finger on the exact amount of money that I lost. I know that I transacted sort of close to £2 million worth of bets online. Probably double that when you think about what I was doing in casinos and betting shops that's ultimately unaccounted for. I ended up with the best part of £500,000 worth of gambling debt. But I think it's also really important to stress that whilst the money is obviously important and significant, it should never, ever be about how much you lose. It's actually the impact that it has on you as a human. And so actually, I think sometimes people focus too much on the financial side of gambling when it is far from just a financial problem.
Did your idea about what money meant change throughout this period?
Yeah, I mean, I lost all real value for money. I would quite happily put £1,000 on a bet, on a horse race, on whatever it might be. And yet I would then argue with my girlfriend at the time about spending £25 on a takeaway. So your thinking around money becomes totally irrational, and you prioritize money for gambling over and above anything else. The other issue is when you're doing it a lot online is the money doesn't feel real. And as old-fashioned as it sounds, when I first started gambling, I gambled a lot in betting shops, and actually often with cash and real money. And I would never actually lose as much when I was betting with physical money as opposed to online, because it just didn't feel real. What was your lowest moment mentally? I mean, when it comes to addiction, people talk a lot about rock bottom. And rock bottom means different things to different people. My lowest moment was about as low as you can get, because I'd reached the point where I really didn't want to be here anymore. And I was on the verge of doing the unthinkable and ending my life by suicide, actually having attempted to do it in numerous ways. So obviously for me, that was my rock bottom. And I'd had suicidal thoughts, to be honest, for a very long time. But it wasn't until that I kind of knew I was going to lose my job, thought I was going to lose my family, knew I was going to lose my house and potentially go to prison, that I felt that way. Is gambling addiction mainly a male problem? Yes and no. I think there are probably more men that are gambling addicts, but I think the gap between that has decreased hugely. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one is the advent of online gambling. Casinos, betting shops used to be considered sort of male-dominated environments. A lot of women wouldn't want to go into them because it was just men in there. Now, obviously, you don't need to in order to have a bet. I also think that there are probably a lot more women out there that we don't know about who are struggling with gambling addiction because people believe it is a male problem. And so therefore the stigma and shame that is attached to it means it's even harder to admit that you've got a problem or an addiction with gambling, and that definitely needs to change. And there are some women out there who've come out and been really brave in sharing their stories, and I hope that that will help other women realise that actually it's not just a male problem, and it can affect anyone. Have you ever been tempted to gamble since you stopped? I think the temptations and urges were very evident in the early days. And I also realised pretty quickly that it's just something that I can't do. I use the analogy, if I was a smoker and the doctor said to me, look, if you have another cigarette, you'll die, I wouldn't have one. And that's kind of how I view gambling when it comes to me. And I have strategies now that I lean on to deal with those sort of temptations and urges. But I certainly at the moment don't have to deal with them nearly as much as I used to. Are you still in debt? How are you paying it back? Yeah, is the answer. I'm still in debt. I still have a significant amount of debt. that I am paying back and will be for a long time. In terms of how I'm paying it back, I guess I had two choices. I could have declared myself bankrupt. Nobody would have ever got the money back. People could have then potentially pressed charges against me, and I may well have ended up in prison. But instead, I decided to come clean to everybody, explain what had happened, and that my intention was to pay people back. And I feel incredibly fortunate because people have been very understanding. Some people weren't, but a lot of people were very understanding, and I now have a kind of manageable debt repayment plan. And whilst it's challenging at times when anyone tries to feel sorry for me, I remind them that I've got more money than I've ever had and it's mine, and that's because I'm not gambling. What was your road to recovery? Certainly a long one. I think in the immediate sort of short term, the situation that I was in, I needed some pretty sort of significant high-level intervention, and a lot of it was having a long, hard look at myself in the mirror, accepting what I'd done, taking ownership of it. But that road to recovery, people talk a lot about reaching out for help and telling someone, and that is the most important thing to do. But that doesn't solve your problems. The problem doesn't go away. That's just the start of that journey. That journey has been a long one. It's one that I'm still on. Like most gambling addicts, I wanted a quick fix. I wanted to be cured and not have to worry about it again. But actually, it's something that ultimately I deal with every day. But actually, it gets easier. And of course, it's worth it. And I think by getting professional help, that was the biggest thing for me, because it was focusing not on what I was doing, but why I was doing it and the feelings that were underpinning it. That was what allowed me to kind of stand on my own 2 feet again, move forward with life. And obviously I haven't gambled since, but I think people need to realize that that road to recovery is not something that just happens. You've got to do a lot of work yourself, but it's worth it. How has technology and the internet contributed to gambling addictions? I think hugely, in the sense that it has just meant that people can do it anytime, any place, 24 hours a day, often without other people knowing what they're doing. Online gambling, smartphones, has definitely contributed to gambling addictions. Physically, it's easier to hide. It's often called an invisible or hidden addiction for good reason, because you can do it in ways that you can't engage with other addictive substances and behaviors. You do it online, on your phone. Everybody's on their phone all the time, so there's always a reason to be on it. So you're able to hide it that way when you're actually doing it. I also think some of the kind of products that are now available online, things like casino-type games, slot machines that are very high frequency, very addictive, means that people, as I say, can just access them all the time, and therefore they're going to become addicted quicker.
How is technology helping people with addictions? Is there any technology around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are more and more kind of digital solutions out there to support people with addiction. And actually, I'm involved in a really exciting project with an app called Reclaim, which we are trying to kind of provide a digital solution or an app to help prevent people ever getting to the place that I was, by recognizing signs in themselves much earlier, doing something about it earlier, because I believe that it's more important to stop people getting there in the first place than it is to deal with them once they're in that place. Are gambling warnings on adverts enough to stop addicts? No. In short, in my opinion, as a recovering gambling addict, a gambling advert that is a responsible gambling advert is just a reminder that you can have a bet, branding, all those things that come with it. I would never have listened to any of those adverts once I was in the height of my addiction. And whilst I believe that they're kind of well-intentioned, they're then offset by the amount of adverts promoting it. So, no. What advice would you give someone who you can see heading down the same path but is in denial? Probably one of the most important questions I get asked, but one of the hardest to answer, because ultimately when it comes to addiction, the only person that can stop is them. Other people can want them to stop, try and make them stop, but actually it has to come from them. You have to be ready to stop. And I have a lot of people reach out to me who want support, and then I will always help people and try and help people. But actually one of the first things that I always say to them is that I can't do this for you. You have to do this, and you have to really want to do it. I think with gambling, the most important advice is that gambling will never solve the problem. So many people think it will, but actually it will only make the situation worse. I think understanding that it's possible, life is possible without it, that you don't have to do it. But I think trying to be as non-judgmental as possible, to try and support them, listen, be there for them, is all you can do, and hope. Who did you hurt most other than yourself? I mean, it wasn't until I stopped that I realized the impact my addiction had on so many other people. I hurt most the people who I love the most, my family. It's hard to believe that I put them through what I did. But I think also you have to remember that you did really hurt yourself as well. And in turn, that kind of has a huge impact on other people. I was so selfish during my addiction. I was a liar, I was a thief, I was a manipulator. And the impact that my addiction had on so many people is something that I find really difficult to forgive myself for. I think other people have probably forgiven me quicker than I'll ever forgive myself. But each day that goes past, I'm able to forgive myself a little bit more.
I was a ketamine addict for probably around about 10, 11 years. And for me, that had dreadful effects. I nearly lost my bladder. My kidneys, my liver almost packed in. I lost half my body weight at the time, which I went down to around about 6 stone. But to be honest, that wasn't ketamine's fault, that was my fault.